lot of surfing is generally just holding and releasing. Like, where do you hold and where do you release the energy? Where do you hold and where do you release your momentum?
Welcome to the Basis Surf Podcast. Very excited. We got Matt Pagan. He's a former competitive surfer, but also just a super impressive creator. He's got a surf school. He does surf coaching. He does boards and shapes really sick looking boards. And it's just a general overall man. And it just goes out and gets stuff done. So very excited to chat with you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I love what you're building. It's definitely making a lot of noise, and it's an honor to be here. And yeah, I'm excited to have a conversation.
Oh yeah. So we're gonna get into your, what it was like competing on the QS. I want to talk about your boards specifically. It's interesting because you're a very high performance surfer, but then you also shape like 7.0 twin pins and you rip on them. So it's like I kind of want to. I feel like a lot of people are going to resonate with that and be interested in your boards and just like how to surf those types of boards because there's a lot of people that want to ride those types of boards better.
Sure.
And then obviously just kind of how you approach your coaching and all that. But when we start at the beginning, because, I just want to hear a little bit about, how you got into surfing. I know you're from the South Bay of LA, but why don't we just start there? We can kind of go from there.
Yeah. I think, where I started surfing, I started a little bit later. My dad's a surfer as well, and he's just kind of approaching 70, and he's a carpenter by trade, and he kind of grew up in the era where pro surfing wasn't necessarily cool. So he just he was a carpenter that surfed when he could, and he also had 5 kids from like a span of like 20 years. So like there's just we have 5 kids, bunch of us. We're like spread out pretty far in age, but like really close and like family culture and family stuff. So that part's really cool. I guess the part of it that makes that really fun is like we absorbed everything that everybody else did. So yeah, my dad grew up in Playa del Rey and surfed a bunch of these, different waves growing up. And after coming back from Santa Cruz, I got really back into the surf kind of culture and industry. And then, or not industry, just the surfing culture. And he kind of was like the era of Mickey Dora, where it wasn't like cool to be a pro surfer, but he hired all these like young kids because he started getting really good at what he was doing as a carpenter. And then it was cool because he started hiring all these young kids to be carpenters that were surfers that grew up in the area that were kind of like, didn't have a lot of direction, And so I think what's been cool is like, I've kind of adopted that same mentality, like with what I'm building now, like all these years later. I've kind of always gravitated towards like these really cool brands that have like, quote unquote, like family culture. Like Body Glove had a really strong one growing up. Ruka was like a dream sponsor as a kid. I dreamed about it in middle school, and then it happened like 12 years later. So then my dad taught me how to surf. I was 10, and then was like, don't leave me on the beach, pretty stuck to his hip. And then at like 12, I was like, okay, I kind of can do this. And then at that point it was like, all right, I'm surfing with my friends during the summer. And it was cool because I got to surf with most of my friends were their way of getting to the beach and surfing was through my dad. We had boards everywhere, old wetsuits, and my dad at that point was starting to do better at business. So he was just, he was able to create time and freedom and flexibility to take us to the beach and stuff. And so that was cool. And then the other side of it was cool because I would go in as I got older and I kind of started to do some contests and stuff. I got to be a part of the South Bay, which has it has always had and still has like such a rich surfing culture. But I think what was cool too is like in Playa del Rey area, there's like this kind of underground, like Jeff Ho was kind of in that area from like Playa del Rey to Venice, there's like this, like there's a bunch of shapers, like I'm going to blank on some of them. But Robert's Surfboards was up there.
Oh, right.
Jeff Ho, Pat Rawson grew up there. And so there's like this really interesting melting pot of just visionaries and artists and great shapers that kind of grew up on the outskirts of LA in like that area. And now it's kind of gentrified and built up, but they then also went to Hawaii, which was like such an interesting, like almost like Mecca for us surfers in LA. It was like, okay, we have pretty decent waves. It's not great. Maybe sometimes some of the worst waves in the world, but but then we would, Hawaii was like the thing that we all tried to do. And I think that went back from like to a Pat Rawson, Jeff Ho type person to like Alex Gray was somebody that we looked up to as a kid, him packing
All right.
closeouts at Off the Wall was like something that
Yeah.
like, I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. And then when I started going over there, I never really achieved probably what he did, but I've got my fair share of waves. And then you just kind of you start finding your heroes and people that you're trying to emulate. So anyways, yeah, that's kind of a little all over the place, but yeah. So I started, surfing El Porto in Manhattan Beach, which is kind of like northern Manhattan Beach. And then some of the jetties that are a little bit north of there is like in front of the airport, which are a lot of just novelty waves. But I think when you drive by it, you kind of figure out where and when to go.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's kind of a little bit of how I started getting into it.
It's interesting because I think like if El Porto is your home break, it makes you a really good surfer because El Porto can be such a challenging wave.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've spent some time surfing it, and like it has its moments, and when it has its moments, it is like so fun. But then a lot of time it is just, it's a really challenging wave. And then when you go to like, perfect point or reef or whatever, you're like, oh, this is easy. I don't know if it was like that for you, but obviously there's a different difficulty when you go from, Porto to Hawaii.
Totally.
Hey everyone, my name is Van, and I'm an everyday surfer that's just obsessed with improving. And I wanted to take everything that I've learned, everything that I've struggled with, all the mistakes that I've learned along the way, and share it with you to help you become the best surfer that you can be. And I'm super lucky on this podcast, I get to interview the world's top pros, shapers, coaches, and take you along on my journey as I try to learn, uncover all the gold so you can apply to your own surfing. So hopefully you're going to get some value out of this. And the best way you can support me is just simply by sharing this podcast with whoever else you think may benefit from it. I also have been working really hard for a long time on something that I think is going to help a ton of people. I know that it was a game changer for myself as well. But more to come on that over the next coming months. I'm super excited. Thank you for all the support. And for those of you just joining for the first time, welcome to the Basis community. Super stoked to have you.
All right. So you started getting serious about competing.
Yeah.
And so would you describe yourself as a naturally like talented surfer? It sounds like you come from a family of athletes and you're coming from this, like, it sounds like your dad is instilling in you like this very competitive mindset. It's all about, you have someone that's playing pro baseball or get pretty serious on the baseball side. So it seems like a part of your culture, but like, how would you have described that? What was it like for you internally? Was it hard or was it easy? Was it something that came natural to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think growing up in the LA area and learning to surf El Porto, like you said, is a really challenging wave. And I think we grew up outside of like the quote unquote surf culture. So there were parts that were really challenging, but there were parts that like my dad kind of did everything he could when he found out this is the thing that I wanted to pursue. He supported it, financially supported it. So yeah, I think it was like an interesting dynamic growing up because there were elements of like kind of the soccer parent from my dad because he just really wanted to be there for me as much as possible, which is what he didn't have growing up doing sports. So he was like, oh, if I do this, I'm going to push him, where I'm a lot more like analytical. I'm like breaking myself down all the time. What could I have done better? What could I have said better? What could I, it's just,
yeah.
And for whatever reason, kind of my personality was like that from the get. So that dynamic, we would clash. And it was like very interesting because I would have like pretty high highs and low lows. So like I finaled, I think my senior year of high school or like the year right after, it was like my junior year of the ASP juniors. It was like we competed at the lane in Santa Cruz, and I always felt like I did well in the amateur events, and then I finaled at the pro junior event and made the podium, which was cool because Mason Ho won, and then a couple other like prolific surfers did well, and I beat some people, and so it was like this really interesting thing where I was like, oh, I can do this, I know I can do it, but then I would like lose first round the next event because I got so nervous that I just would like self-destruct. And then my dad's more of like hammer the nail mentality. And so it was just like, yeah, it was just, we didn't mesh for a while. We're great now.
Yeah.
But
Right.
for a while, it was like, that was like the biggest dynamic, was just trying to navigate like, oh, I've got all these like emotions and, and these nerves and these feelings, and I don't really know what to do with them. And I was trying to like run from them, I think. And I think that ironically made it so much worse. But I think that was like maybe the most challenging. And then that progressed throughout my like kind of professional contest surfing journey from like, I would say 16 or 17 till about 22, 23 years old, when I was like really trying. I think I ended up like 150 in the world at the highest point. But then I would have like regional, like make a semi here, make a QS quarterfinal here. And then at the time I was working with I got to work with some amazing coaches. I got to work with Ian Cairns at the time when Brett Simpson was just dominating, and he won 2 US Open titles, I think back to back. And at that time, him and the Godowskis brothers, Austin Ware, Nate Yeomans, those were like the guys I looked at and kind of was training underneath while training with Ian Cairns. And I remember like the first year I trained with him, he told my dad, he's like, yeah, mate, he should go back to baseball. He does not have it, But my dad never told me that.
Really?
Thankfully, because I would have just rocked
wow.
me, And so I learned that
That's
later. Heavy. I learned that later. And Ian was like always just very confrontational. Like he just told you point blank, which was great, because to me it was like, oh, there's no gray area. It's black or white. I'm like, I don't have to think about it. So then a year later goes by, and then he was having more heart to heart, like, mate, like you should be man on man in these 6-star primes and, and doing well. He was like, and then he invited me to the US PacSun USA surf team, which I was like, I don't know why you're inviting me to this thing, but okay. And so he just kind of opened doors for me, and it was just really, it felt really cool to have somebody that had such tenure in the industry and such tenure competitively and helped establish the ASP to like believe in you. I think like when you believe in somebody, it just can really like propel you forward. And so, I had some really cool moments following that. I think I like made it through the trials one year at the US Open, which is like 4 heats in itself. And then made like 5 heats in the Pro Junior and just barely missed the final. It was like pumping. It was like that year, Peter Mel and a couple other guys were on skis, and because it was so big, we couldn't even make the paddle out. So they were pulling us on skis, and I'd broken all my shortboards, and I was riding a 6'4" and just trying to put the thing in the lip, and it was fun, So, yeah.
Wait, so what were, you mentioned, during this time period, you worked with a bunch of great coaches. What were some of the best pieces of advice that they gave you, in terms of technique or whatever was most, what stands out at you?
Yeah, I've worked with some great coaches, and I've seen some great coaches. And so if I don't mention, there's going to be great people I forget to mention. But the 3 that stand out to me the most are Ian Cairns, Chris Gallagher, and then Austin Ware. Ian Cairns was a lot of like, how do I look at the lineup? Like, what am I looking at? Like, the ocean's always moving. How do I look at what the forecast is telling me? And then how do I marry that with what I'm seeing? And then how do I like apply it when I paddle out? So a lot of it was like, never sit. If you're surfing, you don't get to sit. Sitting is your off button. So it was like, it became kind of like a cardiovascular, workout to surf with Ian. And that was a lot of heat training. It wasn't like, hey, hey man, let's go surf. We're going to go surf Rockaways. We're just going to go hang and catch a couple waves on our mid-lengths. And, it's just a kind of a different dynamic, different side of the spectrum. But I think for me now, that's so ingrained in me that I'm always trying to do that when I surf, because I don't surf as much as I do. I surf as I used to, obviously. I surf maybe 1 to 3 times a week, and probably for an hour each time. And I know that, okay, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to try and line it up around this day, this time. And I have in the back of my head a map of like, okay, this is how I'm going to approach it from the forecast. And this is how I'm going to approach it when I get there and I'm watching it. So Ian was really great at that. And then yeah, Chris Gallagher was like purely technique, a lot of probably similar aspects to like wave key, what Brad Gerlach's built out. Um, Chris Gallagher was very similar in that sense of like where this is where you put your arms and your hands and let the board run underneath you. And he was like very analytical, which worked for me and worked against me because sometimes you go into the water and you're like, sick, where do I put my like, and you're just like overanalyze to paralyze, you start surfing weird. And so for someone with like, OCD, you're just like tripping out in the water, freezing. But at the same time, he was so good at it. So it was like, I had to give myself, give myself patience to like work through it and, not try and do it all at once. And then Austin Ware was like someone that was competing at the time I was. And so he kind of like mentor and coach me throughout the events. And that was cool because I got to compete against him in some heats during the QS. I actually beat him once, which was kind of a funny thing. You beat like your coach and your mentor.
Yeah, that is crazy.
But he was really great at like marrying everything together and like making sure he just had, it was just one of those guys that you're around and with something you're passionate about and they've had experience. And he was pretty cut and dry. So he's like, yeah, let's just do that. And he was very monotone too. Like if you know him, he's awesome. He's just, not really emotional where I'm like pretty like, my wife's like, dude, you never sit. So I'm like all over the place. And he was just
Being Karen's fault.
Yeah. I'm like moving around all the time. Anyways.
Well, so question for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back actually, because I find this very fascinating, right? Because you mentioned how Chris Gallagher gets super precise about, just body positioning, body mechanics and everything. And you mentioned how it actually worked against you. But were there any pieces of advice that he gave you, or maybe not even him, but things that you've learned that you use with your clients that's really helped in terms of technique? Maybe things that you've uncovered in terms of breaking through in terms of technique.
Yeah, sure. I sometimes I feel bad because I just started a newsletter myself. We were just talking before about newsletters and I started one about it. I'm coming up on a year, like in 2 or 3 weeks. And I wrote every week, like things that you could get better at surfing on. And I'm basically just recycling all the things Ian taught me, all the things Austin taught me, all the things Chris Gallagher taught me. And so, I think some of the things that work against you, it can work against you if you're just thinking about the technique and where to put your arms, where to put your, how to ride my skateboard. How do I ride my skateboard here? How do I stand up on my board that's on a pillow in my house? And how do I do, that you can just sometimes like overcook it and go out into the water and you don't really even know, where am I surfing? What's the tide doing? What's the swell doing? What's the wind doing? What's the current doing? Like for example, El Porto is a great example. In the summertime, we actually have a lot of closeouts because all the south swell brings the sand in. It fills on all of our holes. So during the winter, we have like these drains and that are like urban drains, but and then we also have a lot of like just west swell that kind of mixes things up and creates rip currents. And it kind of creates these really cool, like you said, you had a fun session. I bet it was when, you'd have like a right or a left break and it go from shallow water to deep water. And then there was a current that kind of pulled you right back out to it. Almost like a little mini point break. Yeah. So knowing that in the wintertime helps, it helps you be able to catch more waves, which ultimately then you can work on technique. But in the summertime, a lot of those holes are filled. And so then a lot of people are learning how to surf in the summertime. And it's tough because in the summertime in like our kind of northern Manhattan Beach area, it's like there's a lot of closeouts or there's just a lot of really fast lefts. And then if you're trying to work on like wave key stuff or Chris Gallagher technique or dang, I was riding my skateboard sick yesterday and I'm frustrated, I'm like, I'm trying to go right and it's all fast lefts, and that's the tough thing, I think, especially like probably with what the content you're creating is like, how do you translate all this great knowledge into like everyday use? And so I think there are definitely ways to do it. The approach that I've taken with like our students and clients that I have like in this under construction surf club thing that started as a newsletter. Now I'm doing these like surf camps like every 2 months. the basic principle is like, if you can't increase your wave count, if you can't catch more than 5 waves in an hour, then like technique is pretty obsolete, because you're surfing, I don't know, 2 to 3 times a week tops probably for most of these people. And with that, like 10 waves a week, 15 waves a week max. And it's like, that's hard. Like in anything, if you do something 15 times a week, it's like, it's going to take a really long time to progress. Right. So there is like practicalities, I think, like, practicing on land and doing it in the water type thing. But I also think there's like, okay, well, how do we, like, for the students that I'm working with, I'm like, how do you catch more waves? How do you get your reps up? How do you get more opportunity? And it's being able to, okay, the swell is doing this. I know that the sand's going to fill in. It's going to be pretty walled at El Porto. So if I do have time to surf, maybe I go up to Malibu, maybe I go up to like Third Point, or maybe I go find like a jetty, or maybe I keep my eyes on the camera and I found out like El Porto has a really good little sandbar right here. And for a week, I'm just going to spend time here and I'm going to work on this technique. I'm going to work on catching this amount of waves, and I'm going to work on this kind of technique. And it's just kind of individualizing it a little bit more, per the area you live in. And again, I think it's, for us, it's a little easier because I live in the LA area, and most of the people that I'm working with live in the LA area. So a lot of it is like, hey, this is how you surf well in LA. So it gets a little bit more like funneled down.
I think that's really smart.
Yeah.
I think that's where there's a ton of value, because your local knowledge can really help people get dialed in terms of the setups, how to optimize things, right, for the conditions, for the what is going on with the swell. So I can see a huge amount of value. I think working with somebody locally who has knows the ins and outs of the local kind of situation, that's going to be hugely valuable.
Yeah, like you said, and then like working with you would be so different on the East Coast, because I just surfed with Ron from Board Porn the other week, and we were just surfing a right. I've never really surfed New York that much. I did when I was younger and did the Unsound Pro, and then kind of fast forward all those years later, my wife's family's from Long Beach area, which is cool.
Okay.
And I've been wanting to surf there. But gosh, talk about like something so different. I had no idea where to go. It's like all these weird little jetties everywhere. And then Ron was like, oh, I'll take you. And we just found this little right in the middle of nowhere, and it was just him and I trading off, and I think sick. Like, just like you said, it's, I would hire you to go out and hey, show me around, show me where, like, how do I approach these waves? What do I do? It's like, it is like you said, it's so specific.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you said that was really intelligent and helpful is the way you prioritize things. You said that there's, like, the number one thing is you got to increase wave count first, and then it's increasing the quality of the waves. And then you can worry about technique. I feel like so many people just get obsessed with like, how do I do a turn, when they haven't even gotten to a point when they should even be focusing on the turns, because they're not even getting the waves that get the turn, right?
Yeah.
And I think that really helps people understand like where they should emphasize what they really need to focus on. And at a certain level, it's just, I think at every level, really, you just got to increase your wave count, right? That's probably that's the most important thing of all, right? Yeah. And so obviously dialing in local conditions, and, that's going to be super helpful. What else can people do? Obviously board choice is going to be key. How important is paddling, for example? What are kind of the key things that you think are going to be important if you want to increase your wave count?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think the biggest things that I've noticed growing up here and working with people in the surf coaching business is that most people are riding boards that are generally too small for them. So they're looking at, that's where I think there's a disconnect. So people that have worked and grown up in the industry, in the surf industry in the South Bay, they have such an upper hand because they've seen great surfing. So they're watching the contest, watching Philippe Toledo do an air, or back in the day, I was like watching Joel Parkinson or Mick Fanning. Those are the guys that I looked at, or watching Dane Reynolds. But then the reality of like going to Manhattan Beach Pier or going to El Porto and being like, oh, how do I ride this shortboard out here? I watched all my like heroes do it. How do I do this? And I think one of the most common mistakes that most people make is they're riding boards that are way too small. Now, I think leaders wise, like the volume conversation comes into play, and I think it's interesting. And I'm sure there's way better shapers like Ryan Lovelace, like you said, or even Devin Howard that could probably shed a lot more light on the volume conversation. Because I just started, I'm, about 5 or 6 years into my shaping journey. But I think growing up and being able to touch surfboards and feel them and ride them for so long, this volume conversation is really interesting because I think a lot of people, like one of my good friends is Nate Yeomans, and he's the Lost Surfboards rep. And he's like, man, I get so many clients that are like, I want a 6.0, 19 and a half, 2.5, but I want it to be 30 liters. And then it comes out like 32.3. And he's like, well, wait a second, it was supposed to be 30 liters. And it's like, I don't think people fully understand yet that it's like liters is actually volume. It's the resistance between you and the water. And that can generally be distributed differently, but it's also being distributed in a model, in an outline, and with bottom contours, with fins, and I think that's like a big thing that I think should be talked about more, is like overall surfboard design and how the board sits in the water and how it sits in the water when you're paddling. And when you're paddling, are you creating lift, or are you just sitting there waiting for a wave, turning around and going? And so that creates an issue, because if you don't have lift when you paddle, your decision making time is really short. If that makes sense. So like when you sit in the water on a board that's like, in the low 30 liters, which is generally like something that's probably more performance oriented, that board's sinking. And then if that board is sinking, it has no momentum, and you're trying to get it to float on a wave, well, you have to create friction. You have to create lift. And so you have to paddle. You have to paddle a lot sooner. And if you can start to paddle a lot sooner, and if you know, again, the lineup, where are my sandbars? Where's like the premier peak in the lineup? We call it peak 1. Where's peak 2? And so where am I positioning myself in the lineup? And if I have all those things in the back of my head and I can get the board to lift up out of the water, then I have momentum. And when I have momentum, then my decision-making process becomes a little bit longer, or the time I get to make a decision becomes a little bit longer. And then I can decide, oh, is this an actual good wave? Oh yeah, this is actually a great wave. I'm in a great position. And then sometimes it's like, oh, why did I even paddle for that wave? It's a closeout, And I think that can elevate someone's surfing journey. It's just understanding the basic concepts of like, this is the surfboard. This is what the surfboard does. It's not, there's similarities in skateboarding. There's similarities in snowboarding, but those are two things that are static. You can ride, most people that are like pretty intermediate at skateboarding or snowboarding can pretty much ride whatever. I go snowboarding and I'm like, cool, this thing works, turns, and I'm not great, but I'm not going to do rails or jumps. I'm going to go down the mountain. Right. But I think with surfing is like, you have this really big element of like, I got to paddle through the lineup. I have to duck dive, get through all these waves. And then I got to be able to find a wave. Where am I surfing? And then where do I stand up on the wave? And then also like where do I put my board in relation to all those things? Like, where am I paddling? How much do I have to paddle? Because then you go to the other side of the spectrum and you ride a board that's for me, I'm like 6 foot, probably on like a more advanced level. And I'm 190 pounds working on that one. But if I ride something in the like high 30s to like low 40s, I'm gliding, man. Like I take a couple strokes and I can make decisions like I have a lot of time, like, oh, do I want this one? Maybe, and I think that's the cool part about surfing. And I think it needs to be understood more. It's like similar to golf. Like you don't use a 9-iron when you need your driver, and you don't use your driver when you're putting, and I think like if you really want to like peel the layers back and kind of enjoy your surfing process, because then I think there's also this element of like, oh, there's just too much. I just want to paddle out and surf. Well, you don't need to know everything, but you should know like this board generally does this and it will help your surfing experience. This is generally where you probably should go surfing if you're learning, if that makes sense. I know that was a lot. Totally. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's so true, right? A lot of it, I think some people think of riding larger boards as is it just purely helps you get in the waves easier, but it's so much more than that. Kind of what you're saying, it just slows down the entire decision making process, and then
Yeah,
that just makes everything. Even if you're working on your turns or whatever, that's gonna be important because you're gonna see that section and you're gonna be able to take your time, and then you're gonna be able to just think through things a lot
totally.
better. Versus if you're on a tiny board and you're just like barely able to hold on and you can barely react and keep up with the wave and know what's going on.
Yeah,
And I think your approach to shaping is interesting because maybe you haven't been doing it for that long. I mean, it's 5, 6, 7 years is still a decent amount of time, but you are a really good surfer, which I
yeah,
think is interesting, right? Because, you got like the Ryan Birches of the world who are incredible surfers and then have been shaping forever.
yeah,
But, most shapers, or I should say a lot of shapers, or I should say more that you are unique in that you're a really good surfer and you're a shaper. And so I would feel like that feedback process is just going to be that much faster, right? Because a lot of shapers, they need really good surfers to give them the feedback, but there's this delay and there's this loss in translation a little bit. But you shape board, you go out and ride it, and then you immediately know, oh, I want to adjust this, I want to adjust that, whatever, right? So I think that there's a lot of value. And I remember seeing you, riding the 7.0 twin fin on like some monster wave in Porto. I mean, it looked like Puerto Escondido or something about like that. That was insane. What was that like?
man. Yeah, this last winter was definitely one for just to remember forever. A lot of waves, probably some of the biggest waves that I've seen at home, and it was definitely one of those winters for me that was like, what am I doing out here? At that time, my wife was like 8 months, 9 months pregnant, or not 9 months quite, probably like 7 or 8 months. And I was like, I remember paddling out that session, and there were like two like local legend lifeguards. One is Matt Pagan, who I grew up looking up to and aspiring to be like. He was one who got me surfing pipe and all these kind of heavy waves. He's just like underground waterman, great lifeguard, great surfer, definitely somebody that you see in the water and you trust. And then there was like another guy named Shane Gallus who's like kind of become this, it's kind of like a similar mold, And so I was like, oh, they're out there, and I'm nowhere near their shape. I'm like, again, man, I'm trying to lose weight. I'm trying to like get back into, surfing shape,
Yeah.
and I just, have a lot of things going on. So I don't spend as much time in the water. And so, but at the same time, like where your mind and your body are in like two different, you're not maybe in full alignment, then you make some pretty bad decisions. So I get down to the beach. I'm like, Hunter, let's do this thing. Hunter's like, dude, I'm not going out there. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't good. There were like, it was more of like the excitement, factor. He's like, I'll film you, dude, if you want to go and do this. And I'm like, all right. And I remember like having a couple moments in the parking lot. I'm like, I shouldn't be doing this. I don't know if you had that like kind of oh shit feeling. You're like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, just push through. And then when I got to the shoreline, I started seeing like all the sets are coming in, and I'm like, dude, I don't even know how I'm gonna get out here. I probably shouldn't be doing this. And then I'm like, oh, whatever, I'm gonna go for it. And then it's probably about 100-yard paddle out, and I get about midway, and man, I think I wore like two heavy ones on the head. And the second one, my leash is like just stretching. I feel it, and I'm just praying, like, God, please don't break my leash. Like save my leash. If anything, I don't care if the board breaks. Because I was like so gassed. I'm like, and they're not going to hear me, and the lifeguard's going to take a while to come get me, and that's embarrassing too. If you have to, and so the leash thankfully didn't snap, and I finally get out the back. And then I was just like as far out as you possibly could be.
Right.
Like out of harm's way.
Yeah.
But there were waves breaking at like, if you're familiar with El Porto, but there were waves breaking. There's an outer buoy that like, it kind of bobs like when it's big. There were waves breaking in front of that buoy. And I'd never seen that happen,
oh my God,
my whole years of surfing here.
Yeah.
And it was like, part of me was like, man, it's such an adrenaline rush. So exciting, And so I literally caught two waves, and after that second wave, I tried to paddle back out, and my arms were like you get to the point where like start cramping and stuff. I was like, I got to get out of here. And so,
That's
but man, it was
very
so
hectic.
cool catching that wave. It was like, talk about snowboarding. It was like such a big, just steep drop. Um, and then being able to put a board, that was part of the reason I wanted to go out there. I was like proving to myself, I was like, can I shape a board that's more alternative kind of performance? Can I put the board in
Yeah.
like some heavy circumstances, and can it push back for me and kind of give me positive feedback? And I felt like it did. So I was like, oh, caught a wave, was able to bottom turn with control and speed. If it did barrel, I was going to be in the right spot, and it didn't. I kicked out, and it was cool.
Well, so question for you. I mean, in those kind of conditions, would you rather, because that was like a 7.0, 20 inches wide, maybe
Yeah.
like, I don't remember how big it was, but would you, and it was like a twin pin as well, right? So definitely more alternative board.
Sure.
In those kind of conditions, would you rather ride a more alternative 7.0 twin pin, or would you rather ride your normal Hawaii step up,
Yeah, that's
Like,
such an interesting
what would you rather
question.
ride?
I don't know. I really don't. I think we didn't get that many days like that growing up here. And then I got some really great boards growing up from Robert Surfboards. He's like one of my shapers, Robert Weiner, shaped a lot of my boards as a kid. So I got some really great waves in Hawaii. Like got a roll-in pipe wave on one of his boards. I've gotten some really good waves at off the wall. So, but I never really figured out like what makes a good like big step up kind of board. I just kind of like copy and pasted elements that I liked into that board. And I think for me, it was like, it kind of, yeah, it felt good. It felt good enough. I rode that board later on in some like steeper kind of like suck out waves, and it didn't work. It was like a little bit too flat. There was a little bit too much thickness in the nose. So it was like catching. So I had to compensate for it, which has been, again, it's been really cool to be able to like kind of R&D. It's to R&D your own equipment. People are like, oh, you can make shape boards for themselves. I mean, it's one of the most expensive hobbies of all time. I am paying off. This is why I started some of the surf camp stuff, because I'm like, I got to pay off some credit card debt, man. Like this is like, I got a little too trigger happy there for a bit, where I was like, shaping boards and I got to try this one, and then, ultimately you'd sell it used.
Right.
And then Hunter came into the picture, and I was like, dude, you got to try these boards. And then I gave him some free boards at first. And I was like, hey bro, like, I'm sorry. I kind of like, kind of went a little too quick here. Like, but it was kind of cool, because I kind of hooked him, he was like, oh, these boards are fun. And so we've got a deal now where we're working out,
Nice.
Ways to help each other.
Nice. Well, it's interesting because you caught those monster waves that I saw.
Yeah.
But then I also saw you, like, there's this one backside wave, and you did like, I don't know, 20 turns on it, and it was like head high, shoulder high, or something like that. So what are your tips for turning like a mid length? I mean, because you were kind of ripping on that thing. Like, what are your tips for people?
Yeah, I think those mid-length boards are really interesting. Again, I would love to hear somebody like Devin Howard or Ryan Lovelace talk about it, because they're probably a lot more intricate in the details. But just going off of my experience as a surfer and then riding these boards, you can shift your weight into different areas on a board like that, which I think is really fun and really interesting, because then you kind of go back to the volume conversation of volume and then volume distribution, because you can put a lot of, and that's like anywhere from making the deck rails really square and boxy or more pinned out, or I'm gonna leave the tail a little bit thicker, or I'm gonna leave the nose a little thicker. So I think in some of those, some of these bigger like twin fin pin, like in some of these bigger twin pin surfboards that I'm riding, a lot of it is like I'm moving my feet a lot. So because I know in the back of my head where I put the foam. So a lot of the foam is like on those boards, I put it in the center and a little bit more up front. And so some of those waves, I'm like, I know, okay, through my like fat and flat sections where I know I need to like kind of like track, I'll scoot up a hair and let the water run under the board, under the center of it. And kind of, again, it's like the paddling conversation, something like creating some kind of lift and friction. And then that'll like speed the board up a little bit through the flat sections. And then I'll shift my weight back, and I'll, generally if you put your foot over the fins, you kind of you're engaging the whole fin box and you're engaging the whole design of the fin. If you put your foot and like just a little bit further back, you're engaging like the tips and the area, and so it might feel a little bit looser. And so I know kind of like those points. And then if I put my foot a little bit in front of the fin box, again, more lift, it's thicker, but it's also going to be a lot like stiffer and more drivey. So if I'm doing like a more of a high line kind of turn and when I want it to stick in the water, then I'm going to probably put my back foot just in front of the back fin. And then when I'm ready to like bottom turn really hard, more right over the fins, or like, depending, and it also depends on the type of fin I have in the board. So if there's a fin with a lot more rake in those bigger boards, then I'm really pushing it to the way back. If I have like more of a pivot fin in, like the Zach Flores fin, which I love, that's a little bit more, I can stand right on the, like over the fin boxes, and the thing just like, it feels really loose, really lively, especially in like some smaller surf. It'll kind of like have some really cool release. So a lot of it, to answer your question, a lot of it is just, it's weight distribution. And a lot of surfing that I learned from Chris Gallagher is a lot of surfing is generally just holding and releasing. Like, where do you hold and where do you release the energy? Where do you hold and where do you release your momentum? Where are you holding your weight on the board? Where are you releasing some of that and unweighting some of your weight on the board? And I think what's kind of cool with surfing, again, in comparison to other like board sports, is like you're surfing against something that's was created like way out in the middle of the ocean, and it's coming towards the shoreline, whether you are going to ride it or not. That's what's happening. And now it can link up with current, it can link up with wind, it can link up with another swell. And so as surfers, as we surf and as we paddle out and as we stand up, what we're doing is we're reacting against the thing that's pushing towards the ocean. And so what's fun with surfboard design is like, okay, well, how do I create float and friction and lift and where do I put foam distribution in accordance to what I'm feeling, depending on where I'm surfing. If it's El Porto, if it's Hawaii, if it's a big wave at the jetty, if it's a small little wave at Malibu, like it's all the same, but it's just kind of broken down into different segments. And so I think, for me, that's like really interesting, like this idea of like style and grace, because, form and function, they like style and function, they should coexist. They should be meshing together. I've like, one of the newsletters I want to write like in the next coming weeks is like this kind of idea I've been thinking about. I'm like, Tom Curran never had video to watch. He just did it,
Which is crazy. Yeah.
Now we have like all these videos to watch, which is great, but he never did that. He never watched. I mean, maybe he did. I don't know. I don't know him, but he wasn't watching the way we can watch. And that stuff he did at J-Bay was like, I mean, it's iconic to the end of time. Like where he put his hands, how he shaved speed a little bit, but did he really shave speed, or was he just redirecting speed, and momentum and based on the board he was riding? And it's just, that's what makes surfing so fun for me, is like, it's never ending, and we talked about it earlier. It's like this blue ocean where like we can all help each other, and there's an endless amount of board designs, and there's an endless amount of ways to, shape a board for a certain type of wave. There's an endless amount of ways to help somebody, put their foot on their tail bad, or, it's just, I think that's surfing makes surfing so fun, because it feels like it's endless.
Yeah. So fun. I love it. I love the way you put it.
Sorry, I just talk a bunch, but
yeah, no. I can just tell how psyched you are on it.
Yeah.
And it psychs me out as well. Like it's so fun. And what's interesting to me is like how minute you actually are analyzing all this, right? You're thinking about, okay, I designed my board this way. This is where the foam thickness is going to be. So I'm going to adjust my foot placement. And then I'm also going to adjust my foot placement depending on the rake of my fins. Like you're dialing it down like so deep. And I think that is, that's probably why you surf as well as you do. So it's really fascinating. And then you're trying to share that stuff with everybody. So that's sick.
Yeah.
I got a couple more questions for you. So, you shape a lot of these larger boards, 7.0s and whatnot, but I also know you ride a lot of short boards. So for somebody that's trying to progress in get even better. Like, how important do you think it is to size down in your boards once you get to a certain level and you start to improve? What's your opinion on
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think like trying to figure out where to size down or try to get to a more high performance level when you've kind of learned, okay, I can kind of stand up, I can ride and I can turn. I think it's interesting because surfing for over 25 years, I'm now on the other side of the spectrum where I'm like, oh, I don't want to struggle. I don't want to
that?
ride something that feels high
Yeah.
performance and small and little when it's gutless. I'd rather ride like,
Yeah.
the way Devin Howard approaches surfing, I'm not even close with him. I'm like, flaring him up right now. But like the way he approaches surfing is so fun to me. So I'm like, he's 50
Yeah.
and he's surfing at such a high level and he's riding mid-lengths and he's redesigning. It's really cool. He's like copying and pasting like traditional longboard and mid-length principles into a high performance like surfboard. And I think if you're learning how to surf now, you got to think guys like that, because man, it is so much easier now to like surf at a high level, especially, watching videos like, like the videos like you're creating. And, you could create like a little folder on your Instagram and be like, cool, the Van came out with another sick one, save into surf technique, or I want to surf better, whatever. But I think I think sizing down, I think if you're catching a ton of waves and a ton of like quality waves, right? So we went from like, the goal is to, if you want to increase your surf technique, you got to increase your wave count. And then if you can increase your wave count, let's increase the quality of waves you're riding. So where are you standing up? Where are you taking off? Are you positioning yourself at the right part of the wave? A lot of the times, man, it's like, no, you're not, nobody gets like, most people aren't being like, hey brother, can you film me on the beach while I surf, and
Right,
paying a filmer.
right.
If you want, you get a solo shot or you watch the surf line camera rewind. So that's where it gets a little tough. So I think if you're not watching yourself surf on a consistent basis and you're catching waves consistently, let's say 5 to 10 waves in a session in like an hour, it's like pretty good. And those waves that you're catching, you're kind of being able to like take off at a confident spot with a lot of speed and you're finishing your waves strong. Again, we talked about that, like the waves coming towards the beach and then you're reacting and you're being able to turn up and down. And if you're getting to a place where like, man, my form feels good, my hands are kind of relaxed, I'm doing general like great movement, surfing kind of like maybe 70% on my back leg, 30% on my front leg, because you're really never going to go faster than your fins. You don't want to lean too far forward. So if those things are kind of like meshing together and you're feeling it, then I think it's time to like, let's scale down. And now it's not scaling too far down, but it's understanding like, okay, if I do scale down, where am I going to ride the scaled down board? Now, am I going to ride it at my local beach break? Am I going to ride it at Rincon? Am I going to ride it at Seaside? And I usually surf Cardiff. And then I think it's a conversation you have with the local shaper in your area. And I think I can't highlight that enough. I think it's one thing that like everything's on the internet and you can like pretty much just purchase and it'll come to your doorstep next day. Surfboards probably aren't there yet, or you can go into a surf shop and talk to some of the guys. And I think generally like most surf shops, like an ET Surfboards in our area is amazing, or Spider Surfboards. They'll kind of walk you through. And sometimes you're subject to the young kid that like doesn't really know, and then they're not really in the same journey, right? So if you can
totally
find your local shaper and be like, hey, this is what I'm riding and this is what I'm experiencing, can you help me? Most of those local shapers will like give you the time and walk you through it, because again, and I've heard Britt Merrick say it, he's at the top, or Violas, that you don't get into surfboard shaping because you want to be rich and famous. It's like you generally want to help people. And I think if you can talk to your local shaper and be like, okay, this is what I'm riding an 8.0 by 22, and it's like 2 3/4, and it's kind of a fun board and it's pinny, but I'm getting bored on it. What should I do? And they'll probably walk you into like a 7.0, 20, 21 and a half or 21, and go maybe keep it maybe 2 3/4, and maybe, maybe make it I don't know, maybe it's a twin pin, or whatever it is. And I think, I don't know if that helps, but I think that's, I think that's generally like the way I would go about it. And then understanding that the board you do purchase when you size down isn't forever. And I think at some point you start riding that board, and then you're going to want to go back to the board that you had before because, oh man, I was catching so many more waves on that other board. And then, if I take these two boards down to Nicaragua, man, I'm not really even getting in the curl the way I've been getting barreled. I see guys getting barreled. So maybe I borrow one of my buddy's boards that, he brought his step up, but the step up for me is like perfect size because it floats me.
Right.
And then you get into waves and you're like, oh, I'm actually getting tubed, And so I think, I think there's a few different ways to go about it.
Right. So how important is paddling then in all this as you're sizing down and progressing? Yeah.
Paddling is ultimately paddling is the thing that separates surfing from everything else in the world, because you're paddling out, you're paddling sideways, you're paddling laterally, you're paddling wherever, you're paddling all throughout the lineup. So again, it kind of goes back to the friction and lift conversation. So I think if you're struggling to catch waves, don't ride something that sinks in the water. If you sit on it and it's like pretty low, or you're paddling prone and it's like kind of sitting, like sinking in the water, you should probably be on something, and you're struggling to catch waves, you should probably be on something that's floating better. Because ultimately we're all surfing to catch waves. Now, if you want to go out there and surf, which I advocate for, and just go watch the sunset or just feel it, and you're just, maybe you had a stressful week, you want to sit there, by all means, you have to do that. But ultimately, like, we're surfing because we want to catch waves and we want to get better at surfing. So I think if you're paddling and you're kind of sinking and you're having a hard time catching waves, it's just bite the bullet, man, and get something that's thicker, has more foam. Go get something on Craigslist if you can't afford it. Go, try to avoid the soft top thing, but they work and they help. So if you got to do that for a bit, then do it. And then you'll thank yourself later. It's like, I think I compare it to is like, I have a couple of buddies that are like super fit, and I'll take them surfing, and I'm like, the comparison, man, is like, if I go and do your workout, I'm not coming back, because A, I'm going to be so sore, and B, I'm going to look like it's just not fun for me. But if I can do like an introductory course to like the way you work out, then I'm like, okay, I'm incrementally, I can get there. You see the light at the end of the tunnel, So sometimes you just got to step on that more foam and just trust that, like, all right, cool. Give it 6 months, and then I'm gonna progress.
All right, so we'll work towards ending up here. So what if you had to surf the same wave for the rest of your life? What wave would you surf?
Oh man, that's tough. Same wave for the rest of my life. I don't know.
And what would the conditions be like as well?
I'm going to get so much probably slack on this, but the same wave for the rest of my life, like, I love surfing the jetty at El Porto. It feels like if it was just on all the time, I could happily surf that wave for the rest of my life. Just going left when it's heavy. The rights are super fun. It feels kind of like almost like a lowers wave. And you would only really know if you live here, because it's really kind of fickle. But there's just so much nostalgia there for me. Like, Dad took me surfing there. It's like landed some of like the biggest airs of my life there. Had like shockers there. Gotten some really good barrels there. Yeah. So I think there's a jetty at El Porto, and I'd probably, I think for me, I could be like, cool, I'm gonna do this, like.
All right. Yeah. You're gonna be the local. You're gonna be the local dude there. Well, you already are the local dude there, obviously. All right. And then what wave would you? What surfboard would you ride for the rest of your life? You're on a tropical island, or you're at the jetty. Like, what would you ride?
Yeah, if I could ride one board the rest of my life, I think I can. I think I've gotten to a point where I'm like, I'm cool on airs. They're fun. So it'd probably be like, I made this like really cool 6'1", 6'2", like kind of more like elongated twin fin that I basically was like, this one, I want this board to replace my shortboard. And I've been really, really liking it. And so I would really like to, if that thing could just stay prime the whole time, I'm cool with riding that, because it's worked in really small waves. It works in overhead waves. That board seems to be pretty fun.
All right. Twin fin forever. Yeah. I love it. Sick, man. Well, where can people find out more about you, look you up, if they're interested in, all the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, I'd say the best way to keep up to date is like, I guess, through Instagram. Trying to be a little bit more consistent on there. Again, just trying to juggle a few different things at the same time, but I'm actually starting to like hire help for some of those things. So Instagram would be the best way to keep in touch, or paganusa.com. Or actually the best way to keep in touch with everything is to go to paganusa.com and hit the email subscribe button. That's like where I'm updating for surf coaching stuff or surfboards, or any deals that I get. Like Need Essentials gave me like a really cool discount code to relay to the people in the surf club. So again, I'm just recycling all the things I'm receiving and the things that I've learned into that newsletter, and that's probably the best way to keep in the loop.
Cool. And then what are your Instagram handles again? Just for people that are listening on the podcast.
Yeah, the Instagram handles, my personal one is Matt_Pagan. You're going to get a mix of like, the things that are important to my life, like my wife, my kid, church I go to, surfing, surfboards, friends. And then you just wanted like just straight, surf content and like how to get better. I'm actually watching Van, the way he does his things, and very inspired, but that would go to just Pagan USA. It's just at Pagan_USA. So yeah, those are the handles.
Sick. All right. Well, thanks a bunch for joining, man. It was a pleasure chatting.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it, man.